السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله على إحسانه وشكر له على توفيقه وامتنانه، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله تعظيما لشأنه، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله داعي إلى رضوانه وعلى آله وأصحابه وإخوانه. أما بعد، يا رب إن عظمت ذنوبي كثرة فلقد علمت بأن عفوك أعظم، إن كان لا يرجوك إلا محسن فبمن يلوذ ويستجير المجرم. أدعوك ربي كما أمرت تضرعا، فإذا رددت يدي فمن ذا يرحم. ما لي إليك الوسيلة إلا الرجاء، وجميل عفوك ثم أني مسلم. أخواني في الله, we are continuing our lecture series regarding the scholars that came out of Muslim Spain and Portugal, the land of Andalus. Muslims were in Andalus for over 800 years, from the year 92 of the Hijri calendar until the fall of Granada in the year 897 of the Hijri calendar. And they produced greats in Islamic history, they produced greats in world history. Tonight, Ukhani Fillah, we shall look at one of the greatest scholars, or two of them, that came from the land of Andalus. One is called Ibn Rushd, and the other is called Ibn Rushd. One is called Muhammad ibn Ahmed, the other is called Muhammad ibn Ahmed. One was born in Qurtuba, the other was born in Qurtuba. One is a Qadi and the other is a Qadi. This is something that's very rare in Islamic history, that two people have the same name completely. But this is one family, a grandfather and a grandchild. Tonight, Ukhani Fillah, we're talking about one of the greatest scholars, one of the greatest geniuses, not only in Islamic history, but in world history. The people in the Western countries, they know this man, they love this man, they study about this man, but very few of us know about him in the Muslim world. Ikhwani Fillah, tonight we shall talk about one of the scholars. He's called Ibn Rushd. Ikhwani Fillah, in Islamic history, there are two Ibn Rushds. There's Ibn Rushd, the grandfather, and there's Ibn Rushd, the grandson. There's Ibn Rushd, the grandfather, and there's Ibn Rushd, the grandson. The same way there is Ibn Taymiyyah, the grandfather, there's Ibn Taymiyyah, the grandson. So Ibn Rushd, the grandfather, he was born in the year 450 of the Hijri calendar. And he became the chief judge in Andalus. He was the head of the Qadis in Andalus. He was a former scholar of the Maliki madhab, the madhab of Imam Malik. And he was one of the advisors of the empire of scholars that appeared during that time. What is the name of the empire of scholars that ruled most of Africa and Andalus that we mentioned previously? And it is the reason that Africa is the only continent in the entire world that is a majority Muslim continent. What is that empire that ruled? The Murabitun, the Dawla al-Murabitun, the empire that was led by scholars. So this Imam, or this scholar, Ibn Rushd, the grandfather, he was one of the advisors of the Murabitun, the people who were the only, or one of the few dynasties that was led by ulama, by scholars. But it fell under the hands of the Muwahideen, as we mentioned in the previous lecture series. You can always refer to the videos on Ilm TV so you don't forget. So he was born in the year 450 of the Hijri calendar, and he died in the year 520 of the Hijri calendar. This grandfather, his name is Muhammad ibn Ahmed, ibn Ahmed, ibn Muhammad, ibn Ahmed, ibn Abdullah, ibn Rushd. Muhammad ibn Ahmed, ibn Muhammad, Muhammad ibn Ahmed, ibn Ahmed, ibn Muhammad, ibn Ahmed, ibn Abdullah, ibn Rushd al-Jadd, the grandfather. One of the great scholars. So even if you look at the books of the Malikis, when they say Ibn Rushd has said this, they always mean Ibn Rushd, the grandfather. He died in the year 520 of the Hijri calendar. He's also known as Abu Walid. Then the year he dies is the year his grandson is born. So his grandson was born in the year 520 of the Hijri calendar. And he died in the year 595 of the Hijri calendar when he was, how old? What people of his maths? 520 to 595. How old is he? 75. And the grandfather was 450 to 520. How old? 70. So the grandfather died at 70. The grandson died at 75. Both of them, Abu Walid, Abu Walid. The father of Walid, Walid. Ibn Rushd, this one is, the grandson is also his name. Muhammad ibn Ahmed, ibn Muhammad, ibn Ahmed, ibn Ahmed, ibn Muhammad, ibn Ahmed, ibn Abdullah, ibn Rushd. They have the same name, Muhammad ibn Ahmed, ibn Muhammad, ibn Ahmed. You can find this a lot, Ikhwani Fillah, in West Africa And in Pakistan, Indian subcontinent, you go to Bangladesh, you find an entire family, everyone is known as Muhammad. Then they have a second name like Muhammad Zubair, Muhammad Aslam, Muhammad Al-Awwal, Muhammad Al-Thani, Muhammad Al-Thalith. Some have numbers, not even names. Some have double names and some have numbers to differentiate. Because of the love that Muslims have for the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it is the number one name in every birth certificate in many countries. Even if you go to the UK, you go to France, the most popular name in France or the most popular name in UK is probably the name of our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Hate him, insult him, make cartoons, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has raised his level in this dunya and akhirah. Shi'tum wa baytum. So Ibn Rushd, this one, Al-Hafid Ikhwani Fillah, is one of the greatest geniuses in Islamic history, but also very controversial. So controversial that some people even declared him not to be upon the Islam that is required. Imagine a scholar, but people even doubting his Islam. Why is this the case? Ikhwani Fillah, this man born in the year 520 of the Hijri calendar. Initially he starts as usual to memorize the Quran of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then he memorized the Muwatta of Imam Malik, as it was the madhab of the people of Andalus. Then he memorized the books of Arabic language to make sure that his tongue is articulate. He speaks Arabic as is required. He memorized the Diwan of Al-Mutanabbi. And he continued learning and studying different fields. This man studied so many fields that he became something known is known as a polymath. This is a scholar of a number of fields, not only a scholar in one field, he was a scholar in a number of fields. Number one, he became a scholar of medicine. A scholar of medicine. The scholars, they say, this is the greatest doctor or the greatest medical researcher from the time of Galen, the Greek, to Ibn Rushd, who have not seen the like of this man. He has a book, it's known as Al-Kulliyat fi Tib, wholesome rules in medicine, or Al-Kulliyat fi Tib, fi medicine. This book was the formal text in medical schools for centuries in the West and in the Islamic world. He has the best book or the most important book at the time for medical. He's the very first person who described the retina, that is the retina in the eye that receives light, not the lens. He described the stroke where the blood does not reach, the sperm from the heart does not reach the brain. He described Parkinson's disease. This man was great in medicine. So great that he was the official doctor of the Caliph of the Muslims at the time, Abu Yaqub Yusuf ibn Abdul Mu'min ibn Ali, who was the leader of the Muslims, of the Muwahidun. He was the official doctor of the Khalifa. How great of a level is he? He explained the poetry of Ibn Sina. There's a great scholar in the Muslim world known as Ibn Sina, that you find many people in hospitals, they call this Ibn Sina hospital, Ibn Sina pharmacy. But just for benefit, Ikhwani Fillah, the scholars, most of them, they have declared Ibn Sina an apostate. They don't accept him to be a Muslim. They say he's a kafir because he had thoughts that went against Islam. Most of the scholars of Islam are totally against his thoughts, just for benefit. So Ibn Rushd, number one, he was a doctor, medical researcher, not just the normal one, so great that he was known as the greatest scholar of medicine since the time of Galen, the Greek. Galenius or Galen, the Greek scholar who came like 1,000 years before him. Number two, he was a great scholar of astronomy. At the age of 25, he starts discovering new planetary bodies that have ever been discovered. And he writes a lot of treatises on astronomy. This is how the ulama were then back then. They're not only scholars of fiqh and sharia, they're not only Maalim duks, as they say, and they look down upon the students of Quran or the teachers of Quran. They were wholesome. In every field there were scholars. Not like our time right now, you go to university, you do economics, or you do physics, or you do medicine. No, these are scholars in every field, and teachers and professors, they reach high level. Number three, he was a scholar of sharia. He was a scholar of fiqh. We studied in Medina. The very first book they teach you when you enter Medina, or the foremost book they teach you in the faculty of Sharia in Medina and also in Azhar University, is his book, Bidayatul Mujtahid wa Nihayatul Muqtasid. This book is teaching you how to be a faqih, how to be a jurist, how to take evidences from the Quran and the hadiths and to bring out a ruling. So in this book he mentions, there's this issue. The scholars have differed on this issue upon 2 opinions or 3 opinions. وَالسَّبْبُ الْخِلَافِ, and the reason for their khilaf is because تعارض العقل والنقل, تعارض حديثين. Because these two hadiths have conflicted, or this nas is going against qiyas. An excellent book. And that book, Khanifillah, is so difficult even for the scholars to teach. Till today, I don't know if there's any sheikh. There's a sheikh, one of our sheikhs, Sheikh Abdullah Zahim, Ustad Doctor, he tried explaining parts of it, but it's a very difficult book. So he was a scholar of fiqh, sharia. Number 4, and this is the most controversial part that Ibn Rushd came with, he became the scholar of philosophy, one of the greatest scholars of philosophy in history. If you look in European history, they know him as Averroes. They call him Averroes. Number 2, they call him the father of rationalism. Number 3, they call him the commentator. If you go backwards in history, the Greek civilization is what brought the strength of the Roman Empire. The Greeks had 2 famous philosophers. First was Plato. And the student of Plato, the one who came from the school of Plato, is known as Aristotle. These are the 2 foremost scholars of Greek philosophy. And their thoughts and their ideologies shaped the world. Till today, people are following the thoughts of Aristotle and Plato. But these thoughts or these writings were lost in history until the Muslims came and they wrote Arabic books for it. But many of them could not explain what they translated to Arabic. Until this great scholar Ibn Rushd al-Hafidi came and he started explaining the philosophy of Aristotle. He became so excellent in it, that he became a marji', he became a point of reference when he came to philosophy. However, he went overboard with philosophy until it led to the Khalifa of the Muslims at the time, Abu Yusuf Yaqub al-Muwahhidi, the one who was the hero of the Battle of Arak, we mentioned previously in Andalus. He expelled him from Morocco, from Marrakesh. Expelled him to where? Expelled him to a Jewish village in Cordoba. He says, you go live with the Jews. You're not going to live with the Muslims. Your thoughts and your ideologies go against Islam. Imagine, this great scholar, he was expelled. Go stay with the Yahud. You are more close to the Yahud using the brain and other things than to the Muslims. So he goes to the village of Luciana near Cordoba, and he stays there with the Jews for many years, expelled. His books were taken and burned. Only 58 of his books remain from a total of over 100 books. He was burned completely. Why? Because these philosophers, they went overboard. As we follow the Quran of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we know we are, number 1, we're slaves of Allah Azza wa Jal. And Allah is Al-Alim, A'lamu. There's no one who has more knowledge than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. True or false? Our brain, regardless of how much we use it and how much we think and how much we debate and we conceptualize and we bring up theories and hypotheses, cannot reach a level. There's a level it ends. You cannot perceive the events that you did not see, for example, or did not sense with the senses that we have. We know as human beings 5 senses. They talk about 6 senses. But there's so many things. We can't see the malaika right now. Can you see the angels here present? Can you see the shayateen? They're here. You can't see the bacteria, yet they're here. You have to invent a microscope like 200, 300, 400 years ago to see the bacteria and the viruses and the atoms, but they're there all the same. It's not that they're not there. It's not your senses were not able to do it together. So these people, they went overboard with their philosophy. Number 1, they start debating. It's not good even to mention these things, but just to know, philosophy is something that is haram, according to the scholars. It takes you into a path whereby you start questioning everything, except even things that are accepted. Number 1, they start questioning her. On the day of Qiyamah, will Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala resurrect the body only, or the body and the soul, or the soul only? So they say the only thing that will happen, the resurrection on the day of Qiyamah, is the soul. There's no way that body that is rotten in the ground will be resurrected. Right together? But you recite Surah Al-Qaf. The Prophet ﷺ used to give khutbah until the people memorize Surah Al-Qaf, chapter 50 of the Quran. The same disbelief, بَلْ عَجِبُوا أَنْ جَاءَهُمْ, they were believing that if you are already dust and ash and you're already eaten by the ground, will you be brought back alive? But we as Muslims, we believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one who gave you life and gave you death, the same way He'll resurrect you. He created you from nothing. True or false? Allah created you from nothing. So how will it be difficult for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to create you, to recreate you from something? Are you together? Allah created you from nothing. How difficult then, if you're to use your logic, will it be for Allah to recreate you from something? You're already something, you died, and parts of you remain, bones or skeleton, your skull, or the coccyx bone that you mentioned previously. How difficult will that be for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Logically, it should really be easier. So they're questioning this. Number two, they're questioning, was this universe there, or was it created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? What is this question? Allahu khaliqu kulli shay. They're saying no. You see, even in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He took to create Adam, He took the soil and He used that soil to create Adam. That means the soil was there from before. That means the universe was there from before. Number one, what does this benefit you with your ibadah and your closeness to Allah Azza wa Jal? Number two, is there any way for you to prove what you're saying? Do you have like CCTV or documentary or a book written from that? No, the only book you have reference is the book of Allah Azza wa Jal. So believe Allah khaliqu kulli shay. We don't have knowledge of everything. We have knowledge that was given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So many of these questions that until Khanifillah, some of the people, like we mentioned, the Khalifa, he threw you in prison. In this time, Khanifillah, there are many philosophers that appear in this time. We mentioned Ibn Sina. You go to many Muslim countries, you find Ibn Sina Hospital, Ibn Sina Pharmacy, Ibn Sina Medical Research Institute, and so on and so forth. Ibn Sina has a raised position in Islam. Are you together? By his person, the scholars consider him a kafir. Most of the scholars of Islam, they consider him to have left the deen of Allah Azza wa Jal because of the perverted thoughts of philosophy, of Plato and such that they were spreading. Also during this time, Al-Farabi, Ibn Tufail, you never hear such names, you run away. Ibn Arabi as-Sufi. If you look at the series Ertugrul, I watched the first few episodes, then you see a person who's not even at the time of Ertugrul, a person with a white beard, Ibn Arabi. See, the advertising this man to make him to look like a holy man, a holy sheikh. But all the scholars, like all of them, they declare him to be a disbeliever because of thoughts that go against the deen of Allah Azza wa Jal. So Ibn Rushd Khanifillah lived in this time. Very confused man. One of the greatest geniuses from the year 520 of the Hijri calendar to the year 595 of the Hijri calendar. He died in the city of Marrakesh in Morocco, but he was buried, his body was taken all the way to Cordoba and he was buried in Andalus. This is one of the great scholars of Islamic history, Khanifillah, that was born in the year 520 of the Hijri calendar, passed in the year 595. His grandfather was born in the year 450 and he passed away in the year 520. Inshallah, tomorrow we shall continue with our lecture series regarding Sicily, and hopefully in the next 1 or 2 weeks we shall finish with Sicily and we start a different topic, inshallah. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillah rabbil alameen. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Any questions? Now, I forgot a very important point he mentioned. You have an Imam, he's called Imam Abu Hamid al-Ghazali. Imam Abu Hamid al-Ghazali was also very confused, rahimahullah. One of the greatest scholars of Islamic history. He wrote a book known as Ihya Ulumuddin. Ihya Ulumuddin, revival of the Islamic sciences. But this book is full of fabrications and hadiths that are fabricated. That even Al-Hafid al-Iraqi came and wrote a book rejecting or refuting him. Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, when he was going through his stages of life, he left the way of the philosophers, the way of the Asha'ira, and he wrote a refutal known as Tahafut al-Falasifa. He wrote a book rebuting the philosophers. A very excellent book, Imam Abu Hamid al-Ghazali. So he declared that the philosophers, even in the Muslim world, some of them were disbelievers because of these 3 issues we mentioned, or 2 of the issues we mentioned. The issue of the universe being eternal or forever. The issue of Allah's knowledge not being, Allah knows only general stuff, He does not know specific stuff. And the third one, I forget we mentioned, was regarding one of the philosophical arguments. So he declared them to be kuffar. Ibn Rushd, the grandson, he comes and he writes a book known as Tahafut al-Tahafut, the rebuttal of al-Ghazali, the incoherence of the incoherence. And he starts stating that the Sharia and the philosophy are just 2 roads to make you reach the truth. The truth is there, but you can reach it with the Sharia and you can reach it with philosophy. The scholars rejected this. As we have Quran, it follows that path. Based on this argument, he started forcing issues. Whatever goes with his philosophical thought that he took from Aristotle, if he sees that there's a conflict between the Quran and the Sunnah with his philosophy, what does he do? He says, we have to explain the Quran and the Sunnah in a different way that supports or goes together with philosophy. So for him, what comes first? Philosophy. So if philosophy conflicts with the Quran and Sunnah, philosophy comes first. We have to explain the Quran and the Sunnah based on philosophy. So Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah wrote a refutation. It's called Daru Ta'arud al-Naql wal-Aql. The brain that is correct, that is upon the fitrah, will never go against the Sharia. The Sharia and the brain will always go together if the brain is okay and the Sharia, what you're taking from, is authentic knowledge. People have discovered, especially in the last 50, 100 years, like, the Quran said this 1,400 years ago. The Quran said this 1,400 years ago. Like the issue of the fly. The hadith says, if a fly enters a drink, you dip it inside and you remove it. Why? Because one wing has poison and the other wing has the antidote. People used to make fun of Muslims, but they confirmed it. The Quran clearly says that the earth revolves. The earth is round. Many things that the Quran says about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has divided the oceans. There's a barrier, but you cannot see the barrier. You go to Cape Town or the Cape of Good Hope, just here in South Africa, you see where the Atlantic and the Indian Ocean means. There's a clear barzakh. There's a clear boundary. So you look at these things, you're like, subhanallah, look at this. Our brain could not perceive, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala showed us everything. This is with regard to science. You look at something like like history. In history, you find that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran that the king at the time of Nabi Ilahi Yusuf alayhi salam was a king, not a pharaoh. In the Quran, he says it was a king, the one who saw the dream. It was a king, not a pharaoh. It doesn't say Fir'aun. You look at the Bible, it says it was a pharaoh. But all the historians have agreed that the version of the Quran or the relation or what is mentioned by the Quran is correct. There was no pharaoh at the time of Yusuf alayhi salam. The pharaohs came a little bit later. Are you together? The Quran mentions someone known as Haman, a minister of Fir'aun. Haman. Then they say, there's no Haman in the Bible. There's no Haman in the Torah, in the Talmud. This is just Arab stories that the Prophet Muhammad was getting from people. They just confirmed, one of the scientists called Maurice Bucaille, a French scientist. He goes all the way to Berlin. He looks at they called what? The writings of the Egyptians. They're called hieroglyphics or something. And they read it and they find Haman, minister of engineering or something, minister of building. He says to Haman, Ibni li sarha la'alli ablughu al-asbab, asbab al-samawati fa'attali'a ila ilahi Musa wa inni la'adhunnuhu kadhiba. Oh Haman, build for me like a castle or a big building or a tower so that I can go see this Lord that Musa alayhi salam is telling us about us. But the Bible is telling them that, no, this is not true. This is falsehood. The person who was building a tower was in Iraq, the Tower of Babel. There's nothing like Haman. But they confirmed the name Haman clearly. Prophet Muhammad went to the museum in Berlin or in Frankfurt and he wrote the hieroglyphics in Egyptian to confirm Haman. There's nothing like that. So you look at the Quran and you look at the Sunnah and you find with time that the Quran and the Sunnah was correct. Our thinking was what was limited. Are you together? So Imam Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, he wrote a good refutation of the philosophers, but this man Ibn Rushd al-Hafid wrote a refutation against Abu Hamid al-Ghazali until this great scholar Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, he came and he rebutted all the philosophers and the scholars still to date. Even the Western philosophers, they are not able to answer the rebuttals or the refutations that were brought by Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. What Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has shown in the book of Allah and what our Prophet alayhi salam has taught us, the Prophet who was illiterate, nothing he came with. He came with wahi from Allah Azza wa Jalla. That is sufficient for us. So, Ikhwani fillah, do not follow this path of philosophy. We used to do philosophy in high school. Ikhwani fillah, there's a system, it's called International Baccalaureate. Once you finish the O-levels, you do a system called International Baccalaureate when you're doing the British or the international system. So they used to teach us these things. While I used to stay in class, I'm wondering what is going on. Because you're debating 1 hour if 1 + 1 is 2. 1 hour, 2 hours, you're debating class if 1 + 1 is 2. You're debating something, I don't know, am I really here? Or is this an illusion of me here? Some things you're like, you guys need to go to a mental hospital. This is not a school anymore. That is philosophy. The brain has limitations. Your body has limitations. Understand that you have limitations. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created you in that way. Respect your limitations and act accordingly. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين. Shukran for the question. I don't know if you had read the topic beforehand. Any other questions? Naam, Hassan. Did he? From philosophy? No, not quite. Many scholars fell into philosophy. You have Imam al-Juwayni, also one of the scholars called Imam al-Haramain. Very excellent in usul al-fiqh. He went through this confused state of entering philosophy, asha'ira and such things and so forth. But in the end of life, he met a woman from Naysabur. And this woman made the aqidah so clear that when we make dua, why do we look up to Allah Azza wa Jal? When you make dua, you look up. You have that fitrah that you look up when you're making dua. Says, Wallah, this completely destroyed me. وَأَنَا عَلَىٰ عَقِيدَتي عَجَائِزِ نَيْسَابُرْ. I'm going to be on the aqidah of the ajaiz of Naysabur. Imam al-Ghazali himself, the student of al-Juwayni, he takes Sahih Bukhari and he dies with Sahih Bukhari. He went through this. Once you enter philosophy, you lose completely all meaning. You are supposed to question everything. For you to believe, you're supposed to question everything. So you question everything, then you form a hypothesis, I don't know, a theory, all those things, levels that I mentioned. Any other questions? So you did not make tawbah that we know of, and many people fell into this issue of philosophy. It's a dangerous path. The same thing that you find some people these days, they enter the issue of feminism or liberalism or LGBTQ or Rafida Shia, all these are ideologies that go against the deen of Allah Azza wa Jal. Now. Why do you call Ibn Rushd a scholar, and a scholar is someone who acts upon all knowledge? It's a good question, but there are two types of scholars. I'm not calling him an evil scholar or anything, but there are two types of scholars. There's good scholars and there's bad scholars. There are people who, scholars for dollars, as they say, astaghfirullah adim, that's a bad name, but you find some scholars, they change their opinion based on what is convenient for them. What is convenient either for their safety or for their pocket or for whatever reason. You find, like Libya, the scholars at the time of Umar al-Mukhtar, who was fighting the Libyans, and they say Umar al-Mukhtar is Khawarij. Umar al-Mukhtar is going against the Amir. The Amir is Benito Mussolini in Italy. Is that your Amir? The fascist leader who massacred so many Muslims. So you find some people who, even the fitna of saying the Quran is a creation of Allah, that was brought by the philosophers, and they punished the scholars. They killed some of the scholars you mentioned previously. They jailed Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal and imprisoned him, bringing out. Now, that thing has died. And everyone knows, Muslims say Quran is the word of Allah Azza wa Jal. It's not a creation. Why bring such philosophical arguments? And the question you always ask yourself when people bring, even if a sheikh comes tells you something, how does that affect my worship? How does that improve my relation with Allah Azza wa Jal? I don't like to talk about this topic, but sometimes you're finding us about scholars in Saudi or in Yemen, in India. How that scholar, is this like this and this like this. That person in UK, don't listen to him. All of you guys, you listen to those scholars, honestly, you even know them. Before you came to the mosque, you didn't even know him. So you're coming a whole khutbah, you're telling me about Mufti Menk, you're telling me about Asim al-Hakim, I don't know, Zakir Naika. It's not something that increases my ibadah to Allah Azza wa Jal. Teach me about ikhlas, teach me about tawbah, teach me about the Quran, teach me the correct path. Don't teach me about people, teach me about the haqq. Are we together? So always focus on the haqq. Don't listen to these people who come just whatever. That's the rule that you should have. Sufyan al-Thawri, the mother used to send him, my son, go study under the ulama and I will be sufficient for you with my teaching. I'll teach for you. You don't need to spend any money. I'll do stitching, I'll spend for you money. But be careful. Look at your heart. When you learn any hadith or the Quran, do you see as it increased your iman? Has it improved your character? Then you take that knowledge. If it has not improved your iman, it has not improved your character, you go away. It's not beneficial knowledge. You always say, you ask in the morning every day, أذكار علما نافعا ورزقا طيبا وعملا متقبلا. What is علم نافع? It's knowledge that benefits you. Benefits you with what? To bring you closer to Allah or further to Allah. So if someone is coming to give you knowledge and is talking about other people, Hassan, how will that improve your ibadah with Allah? Will that improve your qiyamul layl? to know that Sheikh Akram is like this, is like this, like this. Me and you are not, we enter the grave different times, we are going to have different questionings. So even if I have my sins like which mountain, that's between me and Allah Azza wa Jal. And for you, it's between you and Allah Azza wa Jal. So I don't support this issue of sometimes it's important to make clear some people who might misguide people, but you're telling me things that are not relevant to us. They're not relevant to my worship. They're not relevant to me being misguided or not. Sometimes from knowledge is knowing when to give some knowledge and to hide some knowledge. All right, together, Muhammad. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.